On this blessed Thursday, we are looking at the balance tuning, which hit the PTR a few hours ago, together with, of course, the announcement of the official release of patch 11.1. As predicted, it's coming up on February the 25th. And with that came some balance tuning. Interesting enough that is worth going over the many changes of the specs, and also, ironically enough, right as we started working on the Sims 4 next season, most of this is now to be scrapped altogether because many of these specs have gotten balance tuning changes. So we will have to rerun all of the Sims. Now, the first in line is Havoc Demon Hunter. Havoc Demon Hunter had some problems, it wasn't doing particularly well in the testing. We even have the updated one from a few days ago. Havoc was still not doing great. It was still playing as fell scarred over Eldrazi River for a while, until the rework, which hit Wounded Quarry, also kept basically the older version of Wounded Quarry cooked into the new one. And the TLDR was that you were now generating 30% roughly more souls than you were supposed to. This is pretty relevant for the build, because everything you want to do with Eldrazi River is to generate as many soul fragments as possible, because when you get to 6, you empower River's Glaive, and if you're on single target, for example, your empowerment first goes to Blade Dance and then goes to Chaos Strike, and if Chaos Strike comes second, you gain a 14% single target damage buff for 20 seconds. So the entire question was, can you cycle through 6 soul fragments at least within 20 seconds so you can continuously keep this 14% damage buff up? And then it gets even better, because Thrill of the Fight also gives you 15% attack speed for 20 seconds in this window, and even 20% more damage for 10 seconds in this window. So generating 30% more souls thanks to Wounded Quarry was making this cycle very good. So good that now it became also better than Fellscard. And at the same time, Havoc Demon Hunter players were somewhat worried that the nerf BUT, or rather the fix, was going to come, removing the extra soul generation of Wounded Quarry and making the spec significantly worse. Now things have gotten much better. Besides the buffs, 8% damage buff to the Hunt and Sigil of Spite, and base buffs to Havoc, all damage buffed by 5%, Blade Dance damage buffed by 33%, only the non-meta version. This was to stop some of the degeneracy around the Fellscard build, which practically went on and ignored Blade Dance. Let's play a game, try to find Blade Dance being mentioned in the ability casted. The answer is none, because the damage was so low, there wasn't even a point to actually use this over Chaos Strike. Now the buff is an attempt to make it slightly more viable, that you can actually even press it to begin with in single target anyways. Another very good buff, Immolation Aura, has been increased by 12% in damage, on top of Flamebound bonus to Immolation Aura. Critical strike damage has been increased to 50%. This is as a chance to make you play with Flamebound over Student of Suffering, which is the default talent. Now Flamebound is stronger, and on top of Flamebound is stronger, what Flamebound buffs, which is Immolation Aura, is also now 12% stronger. You also get double the crit strike chance value from your tier set, but of course the main positive change is the Eldrazi River Wounded Quarry being updated. Now you have both cooked in. You have the chance to shatter the soul fragment, similar, already the same to what you had, what was considered a bug, as well as the other problem. Now, when you create River's Mark, you cause your physical damage to any enemy to also deal 20% of that damage to your marked target as chaos. Now the problems with this are like here, here, and here, and that's broken. Okay, when the quarry right now is completely broken, you were supposed to be doing only 20% of the physical damage, is doing like 4 times the damage, and not even just of physical damage, even flat out numbers you see here. The physical damage you are doing between the 2 Wounded Quarries proc is 3.2 million. Which means you should be doing 20% of that as chaos, so about 600k or so damage, and instead you are doing almost 4 million procs from Wounded Quarry, on top of the fact that it can benefit from your stats, it can benefit from crit, it can crit itself, so it's massive, it's doing way more damage than it should. But at the very least, know that even after this gets nerfed, and even after this gets fixed back to normal, at least the soul generation is still there, so you're not losing that. After that, a brief mention of druids, something we've touched on already. Blizzard doesn't really want you to play with this. Likara's meditation now requires players to remain in cat form for 2 seconds hasted to retain the cat form crit bonus if they entered cat form by casting Skullbash or fluid form. So the TLDR is players were trying to abuse, at the very least according to Blizzard, the shifting, the phase shifting, the form shifting of Likara's meditation with the buffs you get from Likara's teachings. So, oh, okay, I retain some of these buffs for 5 seconds after I shapeshift, so this means that if I'm a cat and I shapeshift back to normal human form every 5 seconds, I get to keep haste. Or if I'm a balanced druid and I shapeshift once every 5 seconds into normal form, human form, I get to keep my haste buff. Now instead, Blizzard wants you to basically at least press 1 GCD after you have entered that form. It is a very minor change. What is perhaps slightly less minor is the yet still necessary nerf to Resto Druids. Master Shapeshifter now refunds 30% less mana from caster spells. Now, this is a problem because this allowed Resto Druids to have very easy ways to maintain their mana. You can see here Master Shapeshifter giving you back 3.3 million mana because as a Resto Druid, you just spam Wrath, and spamming Wrath gives you back mana. And that was it. It was particularly hilarious in fights like Queen Ansuric because between phase 2 and phase 3 there is the pseudo roleplay where she's waiting to come down, and then as she comes down she does like nothing for 20 seconds. So this was the result. The result was that you could go, for example, from having 25% of your mana to having full mana just by spamming Wrath. So the TLDR is that now very simply you gain less mana while doing this. You gain 30% less mana while doing this. Talking about changes, there is a nerf to Augmentation Evoker. This is roughly, I believe, a 6 to 7% overall nerf. It is centered mostly around their tier set. Again, the tier set was already nerfed. The tier set already stopped Aug from actually extending Ebon Mites with their free proc of Upheaval from their tier set, and now it's being nerfed even more. You have, besides the Rambling Hurt nerf to the Upheaval damage, which is flat, of course, because now your tier set gives you more procs, free procs of Upheaval, so the amount of times you cast Upheaval is way higher, so the talent that buffs Upheaval gets nerfed in damage to compensate for that. The 2-piece has a 35% reduced chance to proc, and the 4-piece now no longer guarantees you from getting always an Essence Burst when you get your Upheavals. Again, this is to try to curtail the sheer amount of uptime you can have with Ebon Might as an Augmentation Evoker. Right now, assuming simulations and assuming perfect play, you can go upwards of 92% uptime of Ebon Might throughout the fight, which is higher. It's higher than what you currently see, even in some of the top logs of Augmentation Evokers right now in live. It does get close to 80%, but either way, even with these nerfs and the nerf in damage to Augmentation, you still have a higher uptime of Ebon Might than you had in live, than you have right now. Devastation, not much to mention. Devastation is buffed by 4%. Good example of these not mattering too much. It was doing well already, now it's being buffed by 4%, so why not? They are still... It's still nice for them, not really mattering for Mythic Plus because they want to be played, but at least in the raid, they definitely have more chances to be played over Aug, and this is fine. What is not fine are the nerfs going the way of Hunter, specifically Beast Mastery Hunter. So, Beast Cleave, AoE, Kill Cleave, AoE, Call of the Wild, AoE talent are all nerfed. And they are, as mentioned, AoE, focused talents, since this line, especially Call of the Wild, were not matching Bloodshed in single target, so you weren't going to benefit from these in single target fights, but your AoE was quite powerful as a Beast Mastery Hunter. You were actually doing very well. However, there is a bigger problem to this. These two nerfs, even assuming you were playing Core of the Wild, are like a 5, maybe 6% AoE nerf to Beast Mastery Hunter. The biggest problem of Beast Master is that right now their 4-piece set bonus has turned into somewhat of an issue. The issue of this set bonus is that while the 2-piece is whatever, it's nice to get a free shot of Barb Shot, since Barb Shot is your highest source of damage per application right now, outside of your pet stuff. The problem is the 4-piece. Hitting a jackpot, so proccing this or casting Bestial Wrath, infuses your pet with a mutagen, causing its auto attacks to splash for 103% attack power damage as nature to its target and up to 5 enemies within 10 yards for 8 seconds, as well as the mutagenic attacks themselves reducing the cooldown of Bestial Wrath. So you can cast Bestial Wrath even more, so you can get your pet this buff even more often. Now this has created a problem with Beast Mastery. First of all, your uptime of Bestial Wrath was already quite high because of the CDR you have to Bestial Wrath. You know, 1/3 of the time, more or less, you will have it up active. The problem is that now this is double, actually even triple dipping in value, because the buff, the 103 something % AP buff you're giving to your pet when you proc this, scales with the damage increases on yourself, even down to your own crit, even down to your own damage increases of talents, for example, or hero talents, and then it also scales with the damage increases down to your pet, that your pet can get. Anything that could be, like, for example, you know, Hati is summoned, your pets do 8% more damage, that's gonna count for this effect. You're playing with Piercing Fangs, you do 35% more critical strike damage, the effect can crit, it can also do 35% more critical strike damage, so it gets the damage boost from you and then from your pet, and then on top of that, all of this also works on your animal companion, so it's practically doubled. So the problem is that this went from being a 6 to 7% damage increase, which is a decent bonus for a 4-piece set bonus, to, after this tier set was changed, to having potent mutagen being stronger, not just on yourself, but also now showing off as your pet damage by quite a lot. So now this mutagen has gone up to doing 20+% of your damage, part from you, the effect that you gain from it, and then the one from your pet, from the potent mutagen AoE cleaving of your pet. But this is obviously very, very powerful in AoE. A single target doesn't have nearly as much value simply because you're only hitting one target, so this spreading of this AoE splash damage is not that relevant, but in AoE right now is very good. And it is far outdoing whatever nerf this is going the way of BM. So we'll have to see if this will stay in the game. Very likely it will not. So we will have to rather see the levels of the nerfs of this 4-piece set bonus right now for Beast Mastery. After that, not much to say about marksmanship. There is not much hope around marksmanship right now. It was filled with bugs. It was also underplayed. Not many players were even bothering to play marksmanship. Plus 2 out of 3 of the talents changed the year aren't even being played. So it's not easy to get excited about marksmanship. Survival is getting back-to-back buffs now. The first round of buffs from about 10 days ago buffed their basic abilities. So Mongoose Bite, Raptor Strike, and Wildfire Bomb, and now 10 days later you basically get your cooldowns buffed, Flanking Strike, as well as Fury of the Eagle, as well as now more AoE to Fury of the Eagle, as well as more extension to Fury of the Wyvern. Wildfire Bomb's extension from 2 seconds to 5 seconds. Now, if only there were players actually even bothering to try to play Survival, we would know how good this was. Scenes-wise, Survival was actually doing quite well as as Sentinel. They weren't nearly in the same dead category as you would guess from the live results, as well as they were also already doing better in AoE, at least judging by their popularity in Mythic Plus. It wasn't nearly as depressing as the raid. So we will see what will change after these buffs for Survival. We can skip together pretty much completely Mage for once. They're not really getting anything meaningful with these changing. Frostfire wasn't already being played in the PTR that much by Fire, who has moved to Sunfire, and then flat out 10% nerf to the damage of Blizzard. Frost Mage is pumping in AoE right now. According to Blizzard, clearly it was pumping a bit too much, so they're getting Blizzard damage nerfed by 10%. Monk gets the Mistweaver memery fixed. So the Mistweaver memery was about this problem right here, lacking any kind of context. This is what you saw. You saw Mistweaver gapping everyone, and then they were doing this, okay? Almost 10 million HPS bursts, and it was done with Shiji. Shiji is your Mythic Plus tool. Why is this working in the raid? It is working in the raid, of course, because of the changes, not just to this week, but the one before that. So with that in mind, players realize that if they drop a few of the talents and start going, for example, for Resplendent Mist, that gives you a 30% chance to do 100% more healing with Gust of Mist. And then, of course, play with Jade Bond. For the healing increase to Gust of Mist, the single target power of Chi-Ji was out of control. Chi-Ji was particularly a Mythic Plus tool because you kicked only one Gust of Mist up as a heal tool every enemy you were hitting. One of the changes was now Chi-Ji kicks up 3 Gusts of Mist by default, and no longer kicks up multiples if you are hitting more enemies. So they made it usable in the raid, they made it usable in single target. This was taken a bit too far by monks. It was taken to do insane amount of healing. It was basically, in short, Flame Shaper Revoker pre-nerf at the release of this expansion. And the only weakness of Mistweaver was that this has a 2-minute cooldown, whereas Flame Shaper Evoker's cooldown was basically on a 1-minute cooldown. It was twice as good because of that, but in terms of power, in terms of sheer power, it was just that powerful. That's what's being fixed. Your Mastery is nerfed, that's the other thing. Your Mastery worked with Gust of Mist, you could stack Mastery. So for example, these logs, you know, these super high healing monks were probably going for Mastery, yeah. They were stacking Mastery and Haste together. It's being nerfed by 10%. Jade Bond is back to being 20% more healing from Gust of Mist instead of 40. You also have Resplendent Mist now nerfed down to being 120% of more healing instead of 150%. However, this is still a net neutral, maybe even a slight buff for the traditional Mistweaver monk, because Rushing Wind Kick now increases Renewing Mist ceiling by 150% instead of 100. And this is good because this is already your default raid build. It's not the Chi-Ji, you know, Mythic Plus-esque build you were trying for in the raid after the Chi-Ji changes. It already was this one. It already was the one playing with Rushing Wind Kick, and of course playing not the Mistweaving version, but the one playing around Renewing Mist and around Enveloping Mist. So this change is actually a positive buff for you in your traditional raid build right now as a Mistweaver monk. So mixing that with the nerf of Mastery is more or less even as a change. Yes, Mana Tea also refunds less mana. This is something they're trying to hit the two bigger mana regen specs, Resto Druid and Mistweaver monk. Irrelevant, you're still not going out of mana as a Mistweaver monk. You are definitely going out of mana as a Holy Paladin. Holy Paladin is Resto Shaman-like in the levels of mana hungriness they have if they were to be, for example, pressing nothing but healing abilities for 3 minutes straight. Like a Holy Priest, like a Resto Druid, like a Mistweaver monk, they would go out of mana in 3 minutes. Just about as fast as a Resto Shaman. So this change does nothing. It's not that good. It doesn't save that much mana anyways. You need way more than this to fix the mana issues of Holy Paladin. Ret Paladin also doesn't really get much of anything because final Reckoning damage increased by 75% might look like a huge number, but Final Reckoning is about 3% of your damage overall. So you have bigger burst when you use it, sure, but it's barely a 1.5%, maybe 2% damage increase if you bother playing with Final Reckoning. Changes now, for once, Priest is completely skipped of changes, now Shaman. Elemental just gets a bunch of bug fixes. Resto Shaman gets the same treatment of Holy Paladin. Irrelevant, this is not very good. You need way more than this to fix the mana issues of Resto Shaman. The main changes are to enhancement, and by changes we mean nerfs. So Ashen Catalyst now stacks up your lava lash damage by 8% per stack instead of 12. So it's gonna cap up at 64 instead of, I believe, 96% more damage to your lava lash, which is the first change. Then Chain Lightning now increases the damage of your next Crush Lightning by 10% per target instead of 20. So it's cut in half, the damage increase of Crush Lightning. Also, Electrostatic Wager, your tier set, right? This one and this one is the same thing. Your tier set now has a smaller amount of stacking damage of Crush Lightning. On top of this, Chain Lightning base damage is nerfed by 15%. Wind Fury base damage is also nerfed by 10%, and both of your hero talents are nerfed. The AoE damage of Tempest is nerfed by 15%. The AoE damage of Lightning Rod goes from splashing 10% of your damage to 8% of your spender's damage, and then totemic. You now have less damage from the tremor, from 25% more damage to 18%, and then flat out all damage coming from your tremor totem is nerfed by 10%. You have this one nerfed by 10%, you have this one nerfed by 8%, you also have Lava Lash being nerfed in the stacking damage, Crash Lightning damage is nerfed, the Wind Fury attack is nerfed by 10% as well. Overall, this is like an 8 or so percent AoE damage and roughly 4% single target damage nerf for Enhancement. Which also means, as an extra TLDR, that this is nothing. You know, Enhancement Shaman was already having top tier performance, being nerfed by 3 to 4, maybe even 5%, won't really change much in their current power level, so to speak. So and also, just in case someone starts complaining, it was necessary, as we already mentioned a few times, it was the strongest spec, the strongest DPS spec in the PTR right now. So just completely warranted set of nerfs to Enhancement. The last part of the DPS changes is quite interesting because it is hitting warriors who also have now been benefiting a set of double buffs. Because just the other day, and by that I mean 10 days ago, they had most of their abilities buffed, you know, Mortar Strike, Overpower, Cleave, Execute, Slam, and then Rampage, Raging Blow, Crushing Blow, Bloodthirst, Bloodbath, and Odin's Fury, 20 or so percent, and now today they get more buffs across the board. Demolish also, all damage increase by Colossus, Arms Warrior by 30%, you had Thunder Blast damage increased by 25% for Mountain of Fury Warrior, as well as AoE damage, Whirlwind and Whirlwind buffed on both specs. So this is quite large of a buff. The specs were, okay, first glance, you know, eye test, the specs were doing poorly, okay? They were towards the bottom of the results in the rate testing, for example, and amongst the lowest played specs in Mythic Plus, in the high keys in the PTR. So these buffs have gone to significantly buff the specs. Now, there are no active sims already, plus the testing was quite poor for both of these specs. We can see some anecdotal experiences like this Rookery 14 being done literally today post buffs, and you see an Arms Warrior now matching a post buff Aldrachi Reaver Demon Hunter, I should say a post-buff still bugged Aldrachi Reaver Demon Hunter, still matching it and getting somewhat close to a post-nerf Enhancement Shaman with the buffs given to Arms Warrior. So it is, you know, we don't have the exact numbers yet and the full expectations of the changes, but based on the buffs alone, especially now playing Colossus, Demolish, significantly buffed for Arms, and also Mountain now being the hero talent for Fury as well, it's quite significant for both of the specs, which were doing quite poorly up to now in the PTR. Their stocks were middling to disappointing for the season. These back-to-back buffs from 10 days ago to now definitely brought them far higher up front than they were before, so definitely positive overall. What we haven't touched as we were going through DPS after DPS was the same thing, the same repeating thing. Protection Warrior has gotten its damage buffed by 20%. And then we have, let me guess, Paladin has gotten its damage buffed by 15%, Brewmaster damage buffed by 15%, and then Guardian buffed by 20%, and lastly Havoc Demon Hunter damage buffed by 20%. Now, if you're wondering why is Brewmaster and Paladin having only a 15% damage buff compared to the other specs damage buff being larger, is because traditionally, and still now, they had the highest damage to begin with, so they were already ahead of the other tanks. So Blizzard took this opportunity to slightly increase the other tanks' damage a little bit more than the two specs that were already doing best. The explanation from Blizzard was that they noticed from the testing that the damage dealt by tank was actually slowing down quite a bit. They were starting being quite routinely matched in damage by, for example, Mistweaver Monks and Discipline Priests in Mythic Plus. So in order to get them closer up and above, comfortably up and above the healers and closer to the DPS damage, they have been all buffed, with the lower damage tanks being slightly buffed more. Now, a bit weird considering that Vengeance, with all of the changes, and now with these changes in particular, both of these, which will likely be taken by Vengeance now, as well as the actual buffs given to Felskard, for example, as well as the buff given to Felskard just for Vengeance, because Vengeance had a lower value of this compared to Havoc. It was lower than Havoc, now it's slightly less lower than Havoc. Plus the 20% damage buff. Vengeance should now be actually one of the top damage tanks. So it's okay, fine. Most tanks damage is being buffed. It's not really going to change much about the value of any of the tanks, just this damage increase. So overall, these have been the changes for all of these specs. Of course, as usual, players will take this time to complain about the specs that were not mentioned today, like for example Shadow Priest, if someone was expecting nerfs, or maybe rogues. Rogues are once again missing. Talking about healers, Resto Shaman and Holy Paladin are the ones in need of changes, and they haven't gotten any. All of this, of course, will come after yet another round of tuning. It's good to know now that as we get closer to the release of the patch, which now has an official date, we have been getting steady additions of PTR tuning and fixing quite fast and quite often. So definitely we're not even close to the final version of the specs before release. My headcanon guess will be 4 more rounds of balance tuning before the season actually is out. Not the patch, but the season. We will see in the end how many we will get. But for today, on this Thursday, this is all we have to mention for the PTR tuning. So, with this out of the way, on this Thursday we can now say our goodbyes, starting by thanking everyone for having watched the video, together with everyone else who's been supporting completely for free by liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. Now, with these completely pointless things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, we also, I have to continue, because we also then have to talk about Mythic Plus changes as well, I guess.